Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's panel, Faith and Mental Health, a Holistic and Holy Approach. My name is Seeya Sodani, and I'm a committee member of the Women's Mental Health Conference at Yale. I will also be responsible for moderating our 50-minute discussion. So I'd first like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, we have Dr. Kavitha Palod-Seksaria, who is a founder of KPS Psychotherapy, a private practice focused on providing psychotherapeutic services to the South Asian community in Maryland. Kavitha's doctoral dissertation, Hindu Indian American Conceptions of Mental Health, aimed to unpack how understanding a Hindu worldview of mental health can enable greater access to mental health care by the underserved Hindu American population. Kavitha is passionate about more broadly destigmatizing the use of spiritual means of coping in the therapeutic space. Next, we have Shani Banks, who is a Black American Muslim, a mental health counselor, and a practitioner of faith-based psychosomatic and expressive art therapies. Shani is the founder of Holistic Muslim Healing, the only organization dedicated to serving American Muslims through expressive art therapies and Islamic spirituality. Shani has been recognized for her work with Holistic Muslim Healing by the Association of Creativity in Counseling, the National Board of Certified Counselors, and the Chi Sigma Iota Professional Counseling Society. And finally, we have Reverend Naomi Washington Leaphart, who is a Black queer church girl, preacher, teacher, and activist. She develops spaces of spiritual candor, disruption, reflection, transformation, and action. Reverend Naomi is an adjunct professor of theology and religious studies at Villanova University and is the founder of Salt East Light. So thank you to the three of you for being here today. And before we begin our discussion, I would just like to shout out our sponsor, Belonging at Yale. So under Belonging at Yale, the Office of the Secretary and Vice President for University Life offers student grants to promote a sense of belonging and community at Yale. For more information on our sponsor, be sure to check out the conference website. So now that we've got all that out of the way, I just wanted to let the audience know that I will be shutting off my camera for the time being because my video is lagging. I think Frontier Communications is not the best, but just in general, the virtual world, I think it's just hard with the internet connection. So I will shut my video off, but I will still be talking throughout. So to begin our discussion, each of you are here today to share your work as advocates on the topics of faith and spirituality as they intersect with mental health. Based on your work and your own experiences, how do you personally view this connection between faith and mental health? Reverend Naomi, I would love to start with you.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. And yeah, when I think about this question, I certainly would have answered it differently, say 15 years ago. I have grown up in Christian religious spaces that maybe emphasized physical health, always from a kind of pathology approach, right? We need to reverse the chronic illnesses that you are destined to have. So maintaining health was a chore, even in my religious context. We never talked about mental health, though, as part of holistic health. Today, I think that mental wellness is key to maintaining, to understanding one's own faith commitments, right? So I don't connect the dots between perfect mental health and perfect faith. That to me, those two things to me are not tethered. I will say that attention to mental health impacts one's, I think, approach to faith. I grew up in a church community that believed that faith was, that mental wellness was a manifestation of faith. That is to say that the more faithful I am, the better my mind will behave. And so it's I guess what I'm saying is that's a narrative that I'm up against as a religious leader in a Christian context. And so before even getting to more healthy ways to think about the relationship between faith and mental wellness, there's a lot of unpacking and deconstruction that needs to happen. So I'll stop there. I know we plan to talk about it all.
Thanks so much, Reverend Naomi. Dr. Kavita Blode, I would love to hear your response next.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be sharing this space with all of y'all. You know, coming from my perspective, I feel like the intersection of faith and mental health is really where we find our best selves. So when we're living life in life, living our faith, we're aspiring towards our best mental health. I think faith really does this by giving us something bigger than ourselves to believe in, which I think can have really immense power in unlocking our empathy and our compassion for others and helping us grow. It can also give us the reassurance, right, that the universe makes sense. And I think that can allow us to take the risks we need to grow as well. And then when we talk about, you know, the intersecting vein of mental health, I really see it as a journey towards our well-being by bringing our, you know, our goals, our potential in line with our values, and then pushing ourselves to meet. And I think that's the intersection to me.
Thanks so much, Kavita, for that. Shani, I would love to end with you for that question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I take a really holistic approach to mental health care. So looking at mind, body, and soul, and then also just thinking about that soul piece. I think that one of the dimensions of wellness in general is spirituality. So whether that's, you know, a traditional religious practice or maybe a personal spiritual journey, even, you know, having a secular spiritual journey, I think that faith is just kind of necessary, whatever it looks like for you, as having a part of a kind of a well-rounded mental health hygiene practice. And on the other side of that, I also believe that mental health must be anti-oppressive. I feel like our conversations about mental health and the way that we practice mental health has to be anti-oppressive, or else it's not healthy. So looking at faith and mental health, like that means being clear about embracing and also uplifting spiritual and religious minorities.
That, I mean, beautiful, beautiful responses. And I think that leads me to my next question. So a lot of individuals that do end up seeking comfort in their faith when facing mental health struggles have sometimes had negative experiences, because when they are feeling depressed or anxious, they were told it was their fault because of sin, or they just needed to pray more, or they didn't have enough faith. Phrases that are unfortunately commonly heard are, if you're religious, you won't get a mental illness, or just pray. And a lot of these phrases stem from obvious misconceptions and have caused great harm. But how do you, as a clinician or a religious leader, navigate discussions with individuals struggling with mental health who have either been told this or actually view their mental health as a punishment? Shani, would love for you to start the discussion.
Yeah, this is a really unfortunate phenomenon, and one that I think that we all are unfortunately at least somewhat familiar with. And I certainly think there are like elements of like lack of knowledge about mental health and mental illness, and maybe a little bit of like fear of the unknown when it comes to like what mental illness means or what mental health is. But I think one thing that it feels like we're kind of getting at here, and Reverend Naomi mentioned narratives, and I think like the power of narratives is something that is really big here, and the fact that stigma is, you know, typically used to either to like exert power or to marginalize others, whether intentionally or just kind of out of convenience. And so when it comes to faith and spirituality, at least in religious communities, the question becomes like, who controls these narratives and why? And so while I think like destigmatization is important, there also needs to be like at the same time a decentralization of power that happens concurrently. So we need to really, I think, diversify the conversations that we're having about faith and about mental illness, highlighting, I think, a lot of the invisible intersectionality that exists, which means like centering voices of narratives of folks who are, their stories just really aren't shared, highlighting these voices that in both secular and sacred spaces, I think, religious folks with lived experiences like we're doing today, making space for spiritual and religious minorities and practices and understandings of mental health. In my opinion, this has kind of been a two-part failure, I would say. Like in religious spaces, I don't think we're doing a very good job of destigmatizing conversations about mental health, but then also in our secular liberal discourse, I think that we need to do a better job of highlighting religious and spiritual diversity and where mental health falls into that. So allowing people to kind of bring their holistic selves, their full selves into the space, whether that's sacred spaces or secular spaces, because I think that a lot of people are falling through the cracks where they're not really sure where to go in their sacred spaces where mental health is being stigmatized. And then in other spaces where we're having conversations about mental health, we're not looking at the whole person. We're not looking at folks' religious and spiritual selves, and especially people who are holding marginalized religious or spiritual spaces. So all of that to say that in sacred spaces, I like to see us do a little bit better job of doing some of that destigmatization, but also decentralizing the power, bringing up more narratives, and then in spaces like this, doing things like we're doing today and bringing different voices into the conversation.
Thank you so much. Reverend Naomi and Kavita, I would love, either one of you to encourage you to chime in next.
Sure. Again, I found Shani's answer so inspiring. I think it's just such an important question for us to be able to unpack, because it's just one of the most difficult experiences. And like she said, it's just far too common that people actually open up to someone about their struggles and then feel criticized and feel deficient for doing so when they get a response such as, if you were more this or if you were more that, then this wouldn't be happening to you. I empathize because I don't think religious leaders are exempt from the people face of being unable to understand or empathize with an experience that can feel so foreign to them as mental health can. And I know that in a lot of ways it can come from good intentions and offering solutions or explanations or meaning. But at the same time, it can be very minimizing and damaging. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in unpacking that, and then just providing more of the psychoeducation and information needed to really understand what it means to be suffering in the ways that can look, in the ways that can feel. And then, when we're able to do that, I think faith actually, can offer a lot of opportunities for being a part of a healing journey or a coping journey. But it can be really hindered if the mindset is that suffering comes from a deficiency rather than the really complicated and nuanced ways that mental health presents itself. So to get to a place where faith leaders can help people who are coming to them access what they're trying to offer, I think they really have to understand what's happening first, which is going to come from conversations like these, of course, and more information and a reframe to the idea that it's true or helpful that it comes from any type of deficiency.
Yeah, I'd want to just pick up on a point that was made earlier about the power dynamics, involved. I think, if you, in any context, in any group or organization or institution or community, if you have the power to assign normativity, assign and define normativity, then you have the power in that, the supreme power, in my view, in that context. And I think that many, frankly, Christian religious leaders down through the years have taken on that power for themselves to be able to prescribe normativity in ways that allow them to maintain the power in that congregational context. And so if you can say anybody whose mind is wired differently, whose brain responds differently, whose body responds differently, is non-normative, is pathological, is a threat, then you can simply read into your sacred text, in my case, the Bible, that same conclusion. And so, I think that one of the shifts, one of the reframes that needs to happen related to Christianity is having to do with the healing narratives, the healing texts, the healing stories found in the Bible, right? I know I was taught that those stories prove that the goal is sort of bodily perfection. That anybody who has anything that is deemed abnormal about them, deemed that way by the society, by the person who has the power to define abnormality, should pray for and expect healing. And by healing, we meant cure, right? So you had this condition today, and then you experience healing so that tomorrow you don't have that condition anymore, right? This is what we learned, that the goal was bodily perfection, and perfection as defined by somebody other than us. But what we know, right, in real life is that healing does not mean cure. The two are not the same. And that bodies living with chronic conditions, living with mental illness, I have asthma too, living with a disease like asthma, are not somehow unworthy or lacking salvation. They're bodies with different ways of, we have different ways of being embodied in the world, right? So I think troubling the waters around how we read those healing, quote unquote, stories in the biblical text might be one way to reframe a discussion of mental illness in Christian spaces in particular. I also think, a religious scholar says this all the time, and it just stuck with me. Are we interested in an outcomes-based faith or a process-driven faith? So again, this is a shift, right? That I am faithful because of how being faithful transforms me. It's a process of transformation that really is never ending, versus my faith helps me get to X, Y, and Z destination or outcome. So again, my prayers then are different. Please take this mental illness away from me. Please, versus my faith is actually what empowers me to continue on a journey, knowing that I'm not unaccompanied. I'm not by myself. I have something, a source beyond myself from which I can draw strength, right? So anyway, I think those two ideas really prevail in Christian thought. and they don't help when we're trying to be less oppressive, non-oppressive, when we're trying not to be ableist, etc.
Reverend Naomi, I mean, I think you touched upon something that's so important. I think this mindset of like kind of staying away from this like destination mindset and focusing on that journey. And I think I think all three of you had touched upon, the struggles that can happen with the intersection of faith and mental health, where there's still this mindset of like, I just want this mental illness to be gone. I don't want to have this anymore. And I think this, all three of you have already touched upon this, but I would love to ask like a follow-up question to this discussion. Based, I think, on everything that was mentioned, I think, Shana, you've already touched upon like stigma associated with mental health, but how does faith and spirituality affect stigma associated with, mental health conditions and getting access to treatment? Would love to, Kavita, would love to start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was doing my research, I just realized how much, because there is a really short history, I think, in a lot of Indian communities, Hindu communities, more specifically, of talking about mental health, that it can feel like a really foreign thing. That's somehow in opposition to how people understand the faith. And from there can be a lot of stigma, misconceptions, and misunderstanding. I don't know how many people I talk to who are just like, it just doesn't make sense that you would need someone outside of your family or your community to be able to strengthen your mind, right? Because there can be, like we talked about before, this real sense that, okay, it's because of some deficiency in the strength of your ability to control your mind, your ego, etc., to feel like you can be in line with what you want for yourself. So it's really difficult. And then, the culture plays a part where it's like, this is something we associate with the West, or affluent people, or something else that really stops people from being able to access resources because they don't understand how they can fit with their own understanding of what they're dealing with and what they need, and to be able to tap into their own strength and resilience. So I think it can just be really painful at times to watch. And of course, every day this gets better as people gain more awareness and like take the time to address the misconceptions and lack of information they have, and understanding like why there is this idea that it can be really powerful to work with someone who doesn't know you and doesn't have stakes in your life and your decisions and everything you do, to help you tap into your strength and resilience in a way that your mom can't, and your faith leader can't, and your best friend certainly can't either, because they're always going to have their stakes, right? So I hope I'm answering the question, but I think there's a lot of baggage to the stigma that takes a lot of work to understanding that these things are just not in opposition. Reverend Naomi so eloquently talked about just power, and how in so many spaces there can be a sense of holding on to something or mistrusting something that comes from outside of the space that needs to be addressed.
Cheney, Reverend Naomi, I welcome either of you to chime in. And I can reiterate it again, the question about, how does faith and spirituality affect stigma around mental health and mental health treatments?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said thus far. One thing that came to mind for me was the ways in which like stigma is perpetuated onto people. And then within like religious and spiritual traditions, there's also this internalization of the stigma where it's like feeling almost as if, if I'm able to, not seek mental health help, then I'm better, then I'm more spiritual and I'm closer to God, or I'm closer to my higher power if I continue to kind of try to work through this thing in a spiritual or religious vein only without seeking any kind of mental health help, then I'm really achieving, or now I'm really working towards myself. When we spoke about healing as well, and this kind of paradigm of understanding healing, and we also talked about this idea of having to go outside of community, and I think that both of those things are really relevant in the Muslim American community as well, where culturally we are Black American, we are South Asian, we are Arab, we are so many different things, and all of those cultures come together and mix together. Now, there's all of these ideas that exist about mental health and what it means to seek mental health treatment and care. And so, yeah, I think there's also a lot of internalized stigma as well, and this idea of pushing off the mental health help is even better, is even more closer to the divine in a way. So there's certainly a lot of unlearning to do in that regard as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, folk might say, there's no help better than God's help, right? There's no help as complete as God's help. And so why go make an appointment with a therapist? Why take your meds when God is the ultimate helper with capital H, right? But again, that to me is rooted in constructions of power, like hierarchies of help, right? What where do we get that from? So we sort of superimpose our own notions of kind of stratified power onto the divine, right? And we miss all that is possible, and all that I believe is divinely orchestrated. That my therapist is doing the work of God. My meds, when that chemistry gets to work, yes, that's holy. Yes. So we end up limiting God, kind of the characteristic and the notion of the divine, because we are so socialized to understand power in very particular ways. I also think something somebody said, it made me think about the fact that particularly in communities of color that have been made marginalized by a healthcare system that does not serve them, we're also fighting the parallel battle of trying to restore trust in an untrustworthy, historically, healthcare system. And so you're trying to both get people to see that faith and science can happily coexist, that, hey, perhaps even scientific and medical development is an expression of a divine hand in the world, while understanding and acknowledging that this healthcare system has underserved and undervalued the folks who are sitting in our houses of worship, right? So how are we setting people up to be disappointed? They've gotten their ideas shifted. They've got the reframes together in terms of faith. They've got sacred texts to justify why they're making that appointment. And then they get in the office and are treated with less than the dignity and respect they deserve. And so I think that the spiritual work has to also be a political work as well. Making sure that the conditions are such that people will get care and excellent care when they do leave the house of worship to find support. So I think that has to be part of the conversation too. That's holy work. That's faith leadership, as far as I'm concerned, as well as helping people to see what is present in the sacred text, or helping people to think about God differently. So, because we live in a society where our bodies have been used against us, I think we also have to provide some spiritual care to people who are trying to figure out then how to navigate systems that don't feel customized for them. So there's that piece too. I think that it exacerbates any mental health concern that we might have when you're not taken seriously at the point of service, at the point of care. And so yeah, we got to do that political work as well.
Yeah, if I can just, I've just found that so thought-provoking, because there is so much work to be done in the field itself of psychology and mental health in general, to be able to do better and to be better and serve better. And I think part of it also comes from just understanding that there can be this big difference between like sacred text and our actual faiths, and the people with power in interpreting and offering them to people. And so much pain that has happened is because of the disconnect between those two things. And there's a lot of work to do in returning, I guess, power to the actual text, which is usually not stigmatizing, is not coming from like a mindset of deficiency or judgment, and the way that some of the structures of power we talked about can be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that the decentralization, like I mentioned, of power is so necessary, like in both spaces, like in the sacred space of, like you're saying, going back to the root, going back to our sacred texts and really looking at them with a lens of compassion, with a lens of reality, really, that's not being held by this powerful and very dominant narrative that is stigmatizing people. And then in political spaces and secular spaces, being able to uplift people, to be able to uplift people of color, people with marginalized religious and spiritual identities, and being able to hold space for those people so that they are being able to get the spiritual, medical, psychological, emotional care that people are needing. I think that it is a huge gap right now in our mental health care, where we're not at all putting enough emphasis on meeting people where they're at and providing people with the services that they need. So I love that we're talking about this right now.
I mean, the three of you had touched upon the next question I was going to ask. I mean, I feel like I just want to take a pause to soak in everything that the three of you were saying, because I've been taking notes, like this idea of power and the mistrust. That is, I think, what I want to focus on next, because there's a significant medical distrust around among religious communities of color, because we know that mental health struggles are prevalent in religious communities, but because of the way that especially communities of color have been misused by the medical community. I mean, there's years, decades of this history, and that is why individuals turn to faith rather than medical interventions. Among the US, regardless of religious affiliation, more people are experiencing depression, anxiety, substance use, which has only been amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. And they seek out help from the clergy more than general medical providers because of this fear, because of that fear of stepping into that medical office and being turned away, because of the fear of not being taken seriously. And I would love to pose the question to the three of you of how can we leverage that connection that especially communities of color have with their faith leaders to create more culturally tailored, trauma-informed, and evidence-based interventions. Reverend Naomi, would love to start with you.
Sure, yeah. I think that religious leaders need a sort of a cabinet, for lack of a better metaphor, of folks, an interdisciplinary cabinet of advisors who can tap in when that religious leader meets the limits of their training, right? So not every, I think that it's perhaps a misconception, I don't know if it's commonly held, misconception that religious leaders get training in any of this, right? You may get somebody to come in to your classroom and talk about how certain mental health disorders show up symptomatically, or these kinds of doctor, this doctor prescribes, this doctor can't, right? But we are not trained at all to be clinicians, to be mental health care providers, even to be, and I might step on toes here, even to be the kind of counselors that folk need. So not even at the point of a clinician, a trained, credentialed mental health professional, but just somebody who can talk somebody through a situation. That's not everybody's ministry. Let me just say it that way. And so we need people in our back pocket who can help us refer out to the organization or the resource that can be of best use to the person in front of us, right? So, I think thinking of yourself as part of a team. Everybody is not paid staff at your house of worship, but I am part of a team of folks. I got some doulas I can get on speed dial, both birth doulas and death doulas, right? I got some therapists and some psychiatrists on speed dial, right? I've got, a trauma surgeon on speed dial. I got the chaplain on speed dial. Our leadership needs to be seen as part of an interdisciplinary team. And for too long, clergy have been trained to be and thought of ourselves as, one, teams of one, parties of one, right? We're lone rangers, and we have to master everything because people can come to us about everything. But that's just, we don't ask any other profession to do that. I'm not going to my dentist to get my foot looked at. Just not going to do that, right? And so in the same way, religious leaders need to first be humble enough to say, I'm not here to do everything, and I can't do everything. Let me develop a team of folks I can call on to help me. What if we can make that standard practice? What if before you left your credentialing institution with your certificate of ordination or, whatever will make you official, what if before you do that, you've got your team identified, you've recruited for your team, right? That's one kind of systemic change I think we can make so that clergy don't feel like they have to do it all. There's a lot of pressure to do it all. And so how can we relieve some of that pressure?
Where do I sign up to be a part of this cabinet? Because it's just so incredible to me. I've long had a dream of just being able to build more bridges between faith leaders of my Hindu community and mental health providers, and also, just other professionals to build a better sense of, an interdisciplinary team, rather than the sense that if you need help or if you refer out, then that means that your service has somehow been insufficient. Because I think, there's a lot of work to be done in both directions. Like, absolutely, we've talked about the necessity of faith leaders getting some more information. Like, I think for, our communities, mental health doesn't look the way often that we see portrayed in TV or Hollywood or things like that. Like, for this, the Hindu population in the United States is predominantly South Asian, and you see so many body aches for depression. There's not, episodes of tearful crying or things like that, and that has to be understood. And I think it also is necessary for mental health professionals to understand their role in building this bridge back, in appreciating like the role that faith can have in people's lives, and to stop thinking of it as something that's a little taboo to talk about in the therapeutic space, something that's not, evidence-based practice, or just a lot of the again, stigma in that direction, misconceptions, and lack of information about the role that faith plays in people's lives. You're not looking for any mental health professional to start proselytizing, but certainly they can be more open to the fullness of their clients' experiences, to make sure that they're again, just helping them be their best self. And I think there's just a lot of work to be done in all the directions for everyone to be able to better serve communities that are hurting a lot for a lot of systemic, historical reasons. Yeah.
Shani, I just would love to end the conversation with you. We are almost out of time, so I think that will be, we'd love to hear from you, and then we will wrap up. But I mean, Shani, just take it away.
Yeah, I feel like you all covered kind of what we're needing on the side, the clinical side, and then our clergy, what we need from our clergy as well. I just kind of want to speak a little bit to like the role of the individual in all of this. And I want to highlight specifically like the agency and the autonomy of the individuals within our community and of our communities. As far as self-care and relational care, I think part of that is like advocacy and self-advocacy, as long as the environment is safe. I feel like that's a really important caveat, to be able to bring your whole self, to be able to step in a room 100% Black, 100% Muslim, and being unapologetic about it, being able to advocate for what you need. If you're needing queer affirming spiritual mental health care, that is what you're needing. And to know that service providers, our clergy, and our clinical professionals are there to serve you, and to serve you holistically, and to serve you entirely. And so showing up fully and completely and unapologetically, again, with the caveat, when the environment is safe, because your safety is obviously the number one priority here, is your right on yourself, your right for your community, and then it benefits all of us. And so I just kind of wanted to make sure that I shared that, and I feel like everything else has already been touched on.
I mean, I am just blown away by this conversation. Truly, it felt spiritually restorative. That is what one of our team members just messaged. It was spiritually restorative. And a lot of what has been said, I just want to kind of take some time after this to reflect and take some notes and think about how I can incorporate it, not just in my personal life, but the way that I practice faith and the way that I incorporate it into my own work in public health. And I know that I encourage the audience to use Whova to ask further questions, to use the community features to discuss and share your thoughts, and please use that as a space for reflection. I know that we didn't get to touch upon the audience questions, but I encourage the panelists as well to look through after, and if you have time, you're more than welcome to answer it, share your thoughts. But there you have it. This is the end of our panel. I just want to say thank you once again to Shani, Reverend Naomi, and Kavita. I mean, it was just truly such an enlightening conversation, and I, again, just so honored to be just being able to listen to this conversation. I know that others feel the same way as well. And thank you to the audience for making it to our talk today. We are deeply appreciative of your presence. Our next event is at 2 p.m., which is the panel on the impact of eco-anxiety and eco-grief on women and gender minorities. So we hope to see some of you there. The panel will be held on a different link, but you can sign in through Whova. So thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the weekend. Happy Friday, and best of luck.